welcome into the Podcast Editor Mastermind show, the podcast by editors for editors about the business side of podcast editing. I'm Jennifer Longworth. You can find me at bourbonbarrelpodcasting.com. And the one that starts with the letter B is...
Brian. You can find me at toptieraudio.com. Not solid, silly little bald guy.
And I am Daniel. You can find me at rothmedia.audio.
And we have a special guest with us today. And you can go ahead and introduce yourself if you'd like.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Rick Sellnow. Super happy to be here talking with you all. Curiously enough, you can find me if you Google less interesting bald man. So unlike Brian, that
better.
is the key. Yeah.
And Rick is here because he's the digital associate at the Lexington Public Library Northside branch here where I live in Lexington. And he did a killer presentation for the Lexington Podcasters a few weeks ago. And I'm like, hey, we were talking about maybe we should have a guest for our next show. I think I found one. So that is why Rick is here. Thanks for joining us.
Super excited to be here.
Awesome.
Now,
And
Danielle,
before we get... Oh,
I was going to throw
Hold
it to you.
yeah, okay. Sorry. I wanted to get in there before we got started. But...
Yeah.
And I just ruined it. But before we get started, I do have a little bit. So this episode is brought to you by Riverside. If you don't know, Riverside is a remote video recording software system that records directly in your browser. So you don't have to worry about any hardware or super complicated tech. It's simple. You send your guests the link like we did with Rick tonight. And they hop in and click of a button. You can go live or record your interviews. If you want to record your episodes, or if you're interested in being like a producer role or helping your clients record episodes in high definition, try Riverside for free at creators.riverside.fm/Yetis. And if you use the code, Yetis, you can get 15% off of your order. So check it out now. And yes, we are using Riverside right now. Still getting used to it, but so far it's actually been quite a pleasant experience.
So, speaking of Riverside, that brings us to the topic of the day, which is video and video podcasts and stuff. And Daniel, this was actually your idea to do an episode on this. So why are we talking about this?
My biggest issue is I see the pull and the move to video. For the longest time, I was a podcast purist. Hey, podcasting is audio only. Don't even think about calling a video a podcast. But it's at this point, it's you know what? We lost that war. You can have a video podcast. I'm giving up. But I also see just how big video is, and it's only getting bigger. So I'm trying to get my clients to do video. And for the most part, I have quite a few. The problem is trying to get them to understand the importance of high quality video, because Zoom is super simple. Everybody knows Zoom. Everybody uses Zoom. It's really easy to do, but it's awful. It's so bad. So my biggest issue is just trying to get my clients to actually use something like Riverside or recording video locally on their computer or something, and not use Zoom. And that's where I'm struggling with. But I think just as an industry, as podcast editors, I think it's important to see the writing on the wall that video is huge. And one, there's a huge benefit having video, one, growing your shows, but also just as people who edit podcasts for money, there's a huge market as a service to offer your clients.
Yeah, I agree. And just to dovetail with what Daniel said, I think that's super interesting because I was the same way. It annoyed me to no end when YouTube made their big play that they were YouTube has podcasts now. I'm what are you talking about? YouTube has done talking head shows since it's existed. That was the first thing that happened. So I don't know, but love it or hate it, no one can deny Joe Rogan, right? Probably the biggest podcast in the world. I don't know. And that's a huge chunk of his business model. And I'm not saying you have to be like Joe Rogan or do what he does or anything like that. But to Daniel's point, to me, that's what makes it seem undeniable. Yes, content-wise, they are a podcast, and tons of people still listen to them on Spotify, but the video is a massive thing.
Brian?
Cool. Yeah. Awkward silence.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to add, right? I was just going to say, yeah, I was super annoyed too, because part of it's like, well, you lied for like 4 years until people would agree with you that it was a podcast, and now you're saying, well, it must be a podcast. They're calling it that. That's done, right? I'm not going to agree with them, but the fact is, video is valuable. I'm not sure how valuable it is, so maybe I'll be a convert. I think it's something that some of my clients in the future might be interested in. It's not my sweet spot, but it's something I see coming. So part of me is like, how can I prepare, and how can I do it well and not have it be a burden? Because like when I look at the mechanics of it, it's you can start with a $100 microphone and free software to you can start with $100 microphone and $100 camera and look like poo-poo caca, but sound okay. And then file storage, like all of the things, it all starts adding up. It's not 2x, it's like 4 to 5x when you start talking about wanting to do it well at every step of the game, from the gear to the software to the like all of this stuff. So
to having an interesting set, right? Like nobody
Yeah.
really wants to see you like with just your guest bedroom's bed with rumpled comforter behind you, right? Like put something behind you. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, because you have all the issues of audio with like, trying to dampen the reverb and like have good audio quality. Then also you have to get good lighting and have a decent background and blah, 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 blah.
So, Rick,
Very true.
So one of the reasons I asked you is because you had some stats about the impact of video and maybe why we should nudge our clients that way or not. Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah, so actually it was super interesting. So Westwood One, who you probably know, at least in like audio mediums, big for a long time, and they came out with some interesting numbers in partnership with like Cumulus Media and some others. But basically, as far as podcast downloads for new podcast listeners, when they broke it down, the three major players were YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. YouTube was 24.2% of new listeners. Spotify, 23.8%, which is something that I think Jennifer's talked about a lot and things like that. Like when you're looking at younger audiences, that's maybe where they're coming to you from, as opposed to like the old guard like us who are still on Apple Podcast or whatever podcatcher we're using. And then Apple Podcasts was always down, all the way down in 16, which is not bad. And I do want to like dovetail here with something that Jennifer and I talked about too. I would never ever tell someone to stop being in audio format, because I still think that's what podcasting is. Like we joked about like what is a video or not, but there's still something valuable to, at least for me personally. The main way that I consume podcast is I listen on my commute. I listen when I'm walking my dog. I listen when I'm exercising, things like that, that I can't do a video, or if I am doing a video in those situations, something is not right. But so I still think those things are important. But when we talk about growth and things like that, like it's one thing to find your fan base and demographic, but that's an immediate area for growth. And again, I don't know, you tell me if this is like cynical or not, right? But like when you look at the next generation, things like that, like, okay, how do I keep growing? Do I go for breadth or depth? Do I continue to just try to scoop in more of the people who are already listening to me? Or do I try to spread out and do different things? So like for my friend and I do a sumo wrestling podcast that also is on YouTube. And when we go into some of the YouTube analytics, we can see lots of things. I joke all the time that like, okay, we got 50-year-old white men. That's taken care of. Now, can we get anyone else? So those are some things you can try to do, because I think all of us would agree, like, one of the biggest things about podcasts to me is that authenticity, and whether it's parasocial or not, right? Like this idea that like, oh, this person's my best friend because he walks my dog with me and he drives to work with me every day. We know that's not true necessarily, but that's still why I listen. You know, I still relate to those people. And video is just one more way that you can relate to them, right? Like, if they can see your face, then that's one more vector by which they can connect with you. So in addition to those ideas that it is YouTube actually that new people are coming into these things. So like again, to refer back to that report, when they look at when they asked surveyees how they listen to podcasts, and they designated people as heavy podcast listeners, who are people who listen to 6 or more hours in a week, podcast pioneers, people who started listening more than 4 years ago, or podcast newcomers. It's like Apple Podcasts dominates everything on podcast pioneers and heavy podcast listeners, but the podcast newcomers, it's YouTube 27, Spotify 27%, Apple Podcasts 6%. So the growth in the industry, if we're talking about it from a business side, there's nothing wrong at all with being an audio format. And like I said, I personally, as a consumer, that's what I'm looking for in a lot of situations. But if we're going to look at it from a marketing perspective, like the growth demographic is elsewhere.
So if somebody came to you and they said, hey, I've got an audio podcast.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I want to grow it, and I'm thinking video.
Yeah.
What would you point them to? And I'll lay out a couple of ideas, and they may or may not be worth any time, right? So one thing that we often see is just a talking head, put the whole thing up as it was. And the other thing we typically see are just clips and shorts. If somebody was coming to you talking about strategy, what would you encourage them to do in terms of their process, like what they actually do, and then also what they output it as or what they do with it?
Right. No, that's a great point because, okay, so first let's talk about like even just within the YouTube ecosystem. So Shorts is obviously YouTube's answer to TikTok and Instagram Reels, which obviously TikTok is, it might be gravitating away, but Gen Alpha and Gen Z, maybe more Gen Z and Gen Alpha is the one gravitating away from it. But that's the big one. So YouTube, being the evil empire that they are, anytime someone does something interesting, they're like, well, time to do that. So that's YouTube Shorts. But so the interesting thing, if you are going to go, when we talk about setup, because you're 100% right, additional equipment and even storage space, right? Like, do you need to buy a second external now because you have all this video footage? Yeah, like what's happening now? Those are real concerns. But ways you can limit that is if you treat YouTube as your platform of choice, you can do both long form and short form. And you can clip it. And what they say is, so the short form, so Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and TikTok are the greatest discoverability out there. And part of the reason is because of how low the thresholds are to get into it, right? You're literally asking someone to watch you for 20 seconds. That's not a hard ask. Also, the scrolling up, they will find you by accident. So, like, the discoverability is enormous. And the number of content creators that a user on TikTok, Shorts, or Instagram Reels can be put in front of in a 60-minute window is unfathomable when you're in a podcasting sense, right? Like, how would... There's no way you could ever expose me to 100,000 people in an hour, but TikTok will. And so that's one thing that I would say is a benefit on YouTube is that if you, for instance, make your long form content, and we can talk about that, like if you just do some sort of setup that you're recording what you're already doing, and you cut that into shorts, you can use your shorts as a driver for that full length video. That's what most people do. A lot of these podcasters who've gotten big on TikTok. So I think of one example that Jennifer and I talked about previously was the Two Bears podcast, Two Bears, One Cave. I don't know if any of you listen to them. It's a couple of comedians, Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura. They're just a couple of stand-ups, and they started a podcast together, but they are also a video podcast. And so, you know, they have an advantage as comedians. There's lots of laughs, lots of jokes. Those are things that in video drive engagement, right? There's a reason why YouTube thumbnails look the way they do with like, I'm angry, or this is the funniest thing in the world, right? Because that makes you want to click on it. So they take that mentality and cut out the 20 seconds where Tom made Bert laugh hysterically. And then people are like, wait a minute. What is this? Click, and now you've got a view, right? You've got someone moved over, and it's up to you to retain them. That's why I say, like, keep doing what you're doing on the audio content. That's what actually matters. That's the bones of what you're doing. You still have to be good at what you're doing, or no one's going to stick around. But these are ways you can use what I would call this evil empire to your advantage. But And I'm gonna make this one quick because I've been jabbering for so long. But yeah, like setup, it can be as easy. Almost all cell phones shoot in 4K now. So if you are recording as podcasters or podcast editors, especially podcast editors, our stuff's pre-recorded. So what we're doing right now on Riverside is a little different. There are different, even more contingencies we have to keep in mind. But if you're recording it ahead of time, you don't need to have everything plugged into a Blackmagic interface or something that you can switch out. That's $1,000 you can save yourself right there. You can literally go to Five Below and buy a tripod for $5 and take the cell phone that you probably already own, sit at your kitchen table and mount the rear facing camera, not the front, never the front facing camera. But it probably shoots in 4K. So that'll get you high quality footage. If you have a guest on, presumably they have a cell phone and they can record themselves as well. Now you have an A cam and a B cam, so you can switch between it because nobody wants to watch something static, right? They want things changing. Other simple things you can do, there's lots of websites out there, Pixabay, even Wikimedia Commons. You can find high-resolution images of topics you're talking about or short clips of B-roll. There are paid-for versions that are better, but you can do this for free is what I'm saying. If you go to like Pixabay, Wikimedia Commons, you can pay for a Storyblocks subscription if you want. That's another website where you can get a lot of B-roll and things like that. But these are things you can intersperse, right? So like Rick is talking, so we're on A cam right now. That's on Rick when I'm editing. And if he ever shuts up, just please ever, if he will just stop talking for a moment, we can switch to B cam, which is Jennifer or some such. So that's a way I would say you can limit some costs. And another benefit is if we're talking about storage, once you upload to YouTube, like, you can make it their problem, right? Your edited video you can just put on YouTube, and then you can delete all the footage if you really have to, if that's a major concern for you. Which hopefully you end up doing 50 videos down the line, and then it is a concern. But those are some ways I would say are some cheap ways to get started with it, and some reasons too. I've been talking too much.
I do want to cut in because you're talking about how like the ability for TikTok, YouTube Shorts to get a lot of views in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
There was a show I was working on where I was uploading like the full interview. Well, I would do it in multiple steps. So I'd upload like the full like 30, 45-minute interview. And then I would upload like a couple of just like 5 to 10-minute chunks as separate videos. But then I also kind of take like those really powerful moments and upload them as YouTube Shorts. And so like the interviews would get, like 40 or 50 views. But then, like, the first short I uploaded got, the first day, almost 500 views.
Yeah.
Like, 10 times as much as the full interview. And then, like, on YouTube, you can link to, like, the full interview in the short. So, if, like, oh, this is really interesting, they can easily tap that to get to the full.
Totally. As long as you're in that same ecosystem, you can put it right there. Or you can still do it the hard way, right? Like, in the description, if you're cross-posting, because that's one thing I didn't get to, but, like, if you make YouTube your ecosystem and you create a YouTube short, it's very easy to download that MP4 file and re-upload it to TikTok and Instagram Reels. And then hypothetically, you've tripled your reach. Now, that's probably the same user base in all spaces, but like the principle stands. But you're totally right. And that's, I will say what most creators will say is like the discoverability is unmatched on things like TikTok. The retention is awful is what they say, which is why it's important what Daniel says. Like the goal is to find them on TikTok and immediately get them elsewhere, because they won't stick around, and it's because discoverability is so easy. How does TikTok introduce you to 45 creators, new creators every night? Well, because they don't show you the old creators they showed you yesterday.
Yeah, all the time I'm thinking like, oh, like I remember like this one person used to watch on TikTok all the time. It's like, I wonder what they're up to. Oh, they're still releasing content. Yeah. It's just not showing up on my page.
Your algorithm got tweaked, yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, you clicked one too many cute puppy videos, and now everything else is gone.
Unfortunately, it's a little too much doom scrolling, and now I got a lot of depression on my page.
So
Yeah.
Patrick says, this all makes me realize I'm basically still podcasting in 2014. And Brian says me too.
Yeah, me too. But I'm trying to drag myself kicking and screaming into the 21st and a quarter century.
Yeah, that's like on my wife and I kind of like next steps right now is like going through YouTube and kind of seeing what the new trends are, because I used to like watch YouTube all the time 5-6 years ago, and like started watching Twitch and kind of doing other things. Now it's like, okay, well, I need to get back into YouTube. Like, what are the kids doing these days? Like, what's popular? Like, what's the new trend? So like, that's kind of our thing, is like watching more YouTube content, kind of seeing how people are editing, what intros are like. Because like, back in the day, it was like, you'd have like, hey, here's like a 5-second teaser, like, get that hook. Now here's a 30-second fancy high production intro, and now a long-winded introduction. It's like, it's like, okay, now you got a 20-30 minute video, and it's like, now that 20-30 minute video is 6 minutes. There's no music, it's like immediately like getting right into it.
No intro. People will straight up in the comment. Now, YouTube comment sections are what they are. That's a toxic miasma.
Completely civil, right?
It's totally fine. It's the best part of civilization. But they will post in there intro too long, and they'll like click. You know what I mean? And
they'll put a timestamp, like actual here, like go to 3 minutes and 27 seconds to the actual content.
So true. And the things like we all know like clickbaity titles or clickbaity thumbnails and things like that. And they'll put in the top comment will end up with like 4 times as many likes as the video has views, and it'll say, hey, he doesn't actually answer the question in the title, but here's where he talks about it. Click.
Yeah.
And then and just FYI, for a YouTube video, a certain percentage of your video needs to be watched before YouTube will consider it a view. And even on top of that, YouTube nowadays, the way when they monetize you, the way they pay you is through view hours, not views. So they aggregate things together. They actually are tracking the minutes. So what people were doing is gaming the system, and because every time they got a click, it's the same way the old advertising paradigms online, right? Like where people just had to click on it. They didn't care if you bought it. Now it's stuff like enter Yetis on Riverside, so that they're like, no, we're not paying you for someone clicking on a link. We're paying if they pay us. Same thing on YouTube. They're like, no. I will pay you for every hour they have watched. And so if you're releasing, you got to get a lot of views to get those hours up. But I also, another thing that you mentioned, like the intros are, but they will do all the same thing. You can do that same kind of market research and watch what people are doing, but authenticity is still what matters, I believe. And so that's why, especially if you are an editor who's been around for a long time and has clients you've been around with, or if you are the podcaster, you're the talent yourself and you have your users, that's why it's so important to know your demographics and psychographics, right? Demographics are who your listener is. Psychographics are how your listener acts. So knowing those things is going to help you identify what's authentic for them, because some of the things that like Mr. Beast does, if I'm doing a podcast and I'm doing World War II, right? Again, sticking to my 50-year-old white dads. These are my people. Like they are so immediately going to click off if I'm throwing them all these, like, if I'm warping the sound of my voice, if I'm doing quick cuts and stuff like that. That's not what they want. So I do think doing that market research is crucial, but also market research on people doing what you already want to do, because don't get discouraged. This is something I'm guilty of, is the reason I bring it up, is like the idea that like, well, someone's already doing that. Yeah, but you're not doing it. Like, what are you going to do with it? Figure out what they're doing and why that works, and then why you're interesting too. And I think that's easier to get across in a video format than it is in an audio format. Because you can show emotion, you can show little snippets of either your life or the story, things like that, tying them in, which you can totally do in an audio-only format. I just think it's harder, right? Like, that's a lot about working on inflection in your voice and things like that. Maybe if you read a script, right? Like if I'm doing that World War II show, that hypothetical World War II show, I'm probably scripting that. And so I'm going to try to embed some sort of joke or some sort of hook that keeps people engaged as well. Well, now something you can do is visually. You can do that. You can be changing the image to something more that's interesting. It can be on my face. There's a statistic. I don't remember the exact number, but I believe it's something like the average user, they want you to change what's on screen every 15 seconds. Which goes with what Daniel was telling us, right? Like this idea, what used to be a 30-minute like mini documentary on YouTube now is like smashed. And that's because it's competing in this different ecosystem. But you can still do the other stuff, and you can make it less work for yourself by having just your footage of the actual speakers, you and a guest, or just you, whatever you're doing, and then interspersing that with like clips. Again, my World War II show, maybe I'm throwing up a clip of a newspaper article from the time, and then I'm showing up the cover of a book that I'm citing. Things like that. That is not that hard of an edit if you get into an NLVE, a non-linear video editor, which is just fancy terms for video editing on a computer. There are ways that if you're just straight recording yourself, that's not actually much you have to edit. What you can do is hide certain things you don't like in the footage with an image, and then you don't even have to worry about it. So just some ways you can kind of save time and work as an editor, but still get something.
So can we take a little bit of a turn here? 'Cause
Please,
I think, like some of the ideas around B-roll are really killer. Okay. But I think there's also probably the editor out there that's thinking, I keep hearing about video. YouTube, everybody is hammering all of my clients about why they should do video. So I'm not really having to try and convince them. I'm having to try and convince myself that it's worth doing this. That the one, that I'm not doing them a disservice, but two, like how does it make sense for me and for their show? Do you have any insights on like the value that we can bring and what that value is to us as editors, right? So hypothetically, I get paid a certain amount to edit an audio-only show. What's the value of adding video or converting to video for a client?
Yeah, so from a client's perspective, the first thing I would say, again, evil empire, but YouTube will monetize you. It won't happen immediately, right. And it takes work, but like, again, they are the evil empire, but they will find the advertisers. How hard is it to get out there and hustle and find yourself a stamps.com, find yourself a purple mattress, get them on your show, or whatever it is. Or maybe you are partnering with Acast, who has their own suite. And what I'm describing is like the golden era, like getting to the best of it, but it's so hard to get there in an audio format, and those pathways do exist. But from the client's perspective, I think what's always been a draw for YouTube, the reason why YouTuber overtook astronaut in like 2013 or something as like the number one job graduating high schoolers wanted to have, and so like that exists. It's very hard, and but it's built in, right? Like you don't need to solicit clients if you can get into monetization. Or Daniel brought up Twitch. YouTube's a copycat, right? So YouTube has live streams because they want to cut into Twitch's business. Well, as part of their live streams, they have tips the same way, right? So if you have built a following, if you can gravitate over the people that you already have interested in your show, they'll directly contribute. YouTube has memberships because Patreon started being a profitable way for people to make money. YouTube's like, oh, we'll do that. We'll do it all here. So that's what I'm saying. Like, as an editor, it could behoove you, if you are pitching this to new clients, to say, hey, this is an all-in-one money-making platform. All these different sources of revenue are there from the creator's perspective. If that, does that, I don't know, that's more as the creator. I think Steve has a great perspective. He says it a lot better than I do. The biggest hurdle that he and his clients have to deal with is the cost in time and resources. 4 to 6 times that. So like on the one side, you maybe don't have to sell the client on the idea, but you have to sell them on the reality is this may or may not be a 4 times delivery on your spend, but it is a 4 or 5 or 6 times spend increase because the software, the storage, the equipment, the dude editing for 3 times as long, like all of that stuff. No,
I had
you're
a
totally
client
right.
Who
'cause that-
went to video and she's like, it's not going to take you any much longer time than the audio. I don't know why you're
Lies.
trying to charge me more.
Oh, baby. Yeah. No, that's a great point. The only thing I would say is what, like, I don't know. That's so tough because you're all completely correct. I would just wonder where, how long it took them to see any return on investment in podcasting, and if they can, like, if this is an existing client, I'm curious about that. Just like personal anecdote, I've been podcasting for like 10 years or something, but I would very much consider myself a hobbyist. I never made a dime podcasting until I started doing one on YouTube. So it could be that I have a flawed perspective, but like in 6 months of taking my YouTube channel seriously, I got monetized as opposed to 10 years of podcasting on a weekly basis. So I might have a flawed background or something, but like, so in my opinion, I'm like, well, I'm not making a lot of money on YouTube, but in 10 years I made no money on podcasting as a creator. Yeah. I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on your own shows aside, like even, well, this show, or I know it's different as an editor, which is super important for the perspective of this show. But your own personal project shows or even hobby shows or anything on that level?
I will say, like, because I have a YouTube channel, and I put out quite a bit of content, but I never got to the threshold where I could monetize.
Sure.
Like, I hit, like, you need 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of watch time.
Yeah.
And I'm currently at 2,300 subscribers.
Yeah.
But I'm only at, like, I'm maybe, like, halfway to the watch time. So
retention. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and your channel is pretty niche, right? It's
Very
specifically
niche.
Reaper for podcasting. So it's software that people use editing for podcasting.
Yeah.
So it's a subset of people that use the software are going to be interested in his stuff. Mostly, I think Reaper is still mostly used by musicians.
Yeah, 100%.
And I could see the struggle there being because like I said, YouTube tweaked their partner program to where if it's like specifically giving tips on using software, I know the way that I watch Adobe Premiere tutorials, and I pull up a guy's 45-minute video and I find the 3 minutes I need and I watch that. So, but beside that though, I think what you're doing sounds exactly correct to me. So in the world of social media, small is big is like a phrase you'll hear a lot. And the idea being like it's really easy to get dazzled by someone like Mr. Beast who has 68 million subscribers on YouTube. It's really easy to get distracted by someone like PewDiePie or whatever. But there are also people you don't need 38 million subscribers to make money, especially if you look at some of these different avenues like YouTube memberships, which is YouTube's equivalent of Patreon. In the small is big paradigm, that's why that authenticity and making these specific connections is what matters. So I'm curious, like, I subscribe to a couple of folks who have helped me a lot on different editing software, but I will not watch one of their videos for like 6 months. It's almost like I'm just bookmarking it so that if I run into a problem again, I'll do that. So it's that twofold thing of like, okay, how can I be specific enough that I'm the guy these people go to, the lady, whatever, which I think it sounds like Daniel is. Like, those are great numbers. Getting that many subscribers, like, I think that's great. And frankly, YouTube does too, because like you said, YouTube only wants you to have 1,000 subscribers. You got double that. So the question should be, how can you keep them engaged? And one way, there's this great book that you should check out if you're interested in trying to monetize. It's called The YouTube Formula. And the author talks about these concepts of how you can how is your niche topic. First, you build your core audience, and then how is your niche audience mainstream? The example he gives is a channel called Legal Eagle, which is a guy who was legitimately just making YouTube videos that was helping kids study for the LSAT or whatever, like their law tests. And then he started doing these things where he hired a consultant, frankly, and then the consultant was like, well, people are interested in law stuff. Like, everybody likes My Cousin Vinny. Why don't you do a video about the law in My Cousin Vinny? So he started doing what's the real law in these videos, these movies, and that's where he got a large audience of what are not the people who never became subscribers but watched his videos, which dovetails to a question that came up in chat that I think is really great, asking like, how does YouTube do a payout for when you're monetized? Is it CRM based? And it's like tiny. It's
pennies,
like,
right?
Yeah, well, it's like half a cent for every 5,000 views or something like that. So
Jeez.
it's really bad. That's why what I say is that's kind of why I'm focusing on YouTube memberships. That's frankly what works for us, is that authenticity, because it's less clicks that the user has to make, and people do that. People want authentic. People don't like big, nameless, faceless corporations. It's why even if you do an ad read, right, like, it just feels so much better if you can tell that the person uses it. It's better to hear an ad read from a group using Riverside, who is using Riverside to do the ad read. That's kind of what I would say is, for me personally, the benefit of video is increasing the depth on that authenticity and trying to make those direct monetary connections to your consumers, because people want to support people they like, creating things they like. They might not always be able to, right? But
so to that point,
yeah,
we should probably do something, because we make this show for our community, and Patrick has a question that I want to hit, because I think it's really good. So it's specifically around live streaming, and it's actually what we are doing, or at least attempting to do. So we're currently live on Facebook and YouTube, assuming we didn't mess something up, which is entirely possible. His question is, based on your conversation, should you focus on going live only on YouTube, or should you also consider going live on other platforms? Does that hurt what you're doing?
I think you should try to find your audience personally. So, and what the demographics are actually different. I think my numbers on this are out of date, but when I was in college, the average YouTube user was a 13-year-old female. So that would be important to know, that the biggest pot of potential viewers, that's who you were looking to tailor content towards. And I think if you look around that era, the 2015 to 2020, like, a lot of makeup tutorial channels got really big. And you can see that if you study these demographics. That's why that's important. So if you bring your audience with you, it doesn't necessarily matter where you go. Twitch is a predominantly male audience, and they are predominantly college age or young adults. And I think the reason for that is a lot of the content on Twitch appeals to them. It's dudes streaming Dota or League, right? And those are the people who are interested in watching that, esports and stuff like that. So by the same token, as small as big, like, that's why it's so crucial to learn to do what's called build your avatar. Building your avatar means creating the concept, using demographics and psychographics to create an imaginary, a person that is not real, but the imaginary average listener of your podcast who is going to be the viewer of your show. So
for our show, can you help us, right? So know the demographics. Our show is specifically for podcast editors that are in the journey of trying to grow their show. Typically, they're going to be adults, not 15, 16-year-olds. Not saying they're not welcome, but it's going to be your adults in probably that 25 to 45 range. Yeah. Where would you suggest that we stream to not only gain the largest audience, but also help the most people?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I would do YouTube, because there is a massive section of YouTube that frankly is, and I do this too, right? Like, if something broke on my car, I YouTube it and I try to find a video and see what they're doing with their hands on it. Like, I'm not looking at a WikiHow because that doesn't help me. I want to see someone like actually taking the spark plug out of my specific car so that I understand what that looks like. And I think that there's an element of that. That's why I think what Daniel described on his channel is really helpful. The idea of people who are actually doing that. The question for me would be either growing that audience or making them watch the entire thing. If our avatar is, let's say, so you want to find one person with your avatar. So if you say that most viewers are between 25 and 45, that's kind of huge, right? Because when we look at behaviors, psychographics, not always, and this is changing, but traditionally a 45-year-old will have young children. A 25-year-old might have an infant or might have no children or no intention of having children at all, and that really changes behavior. For our channel, we discovered that the best time to drop videos was 9 a.m. on a Sunday, and when we broke down our psychographics, we discovered, dads are watching our stuff before they go to church. Like, we were able to make an inference for this avatar. So... Man, yeah. So, okay, trying to think. What do you think are the behaviors of people? So we know they're probably techie people, right? Like, I like playing with mics. I like new software.
Yeah.
So maybe we look at a channel like Marquez Brownlee, who started making YouTube videos when he was a kid, and he does tech reviews because that's what he's interested in. As a kid, he was getting like old busted cell phones and talking about little apps and things people could do for free. Well, now the dude's a millionaire. And he's only like 25. And so Samsung and LG, before they went out, RIP, and Apple send him free phones. They send him free headsets. Everyone, anytime a new company starts launching, here's our new wireless headsets that's going to be an Apple AirPod killer. And so they send it to him, all this free stuff, right? And they just want him to talk about them, and they'll pay him to talk about them and stuff like that. So maybe that's a channel that we could mimic as editors, like, okay, what software should we be using and why? That's not a niche that I'm super familiar with, though. So you guys tell me, like, what things have you seen in the past that got you to buy something? Like, got you to buy a new headset or a new mic?
Every ad from B&H Photo.
Sweetwater
Or
for me.
Sweetwater.
Sweetwater? Yep. I'm on that bus.
Whatever Brian says is good, honestly.
Yeah.
That's why I have this mic.
Yeah. Well, that actually super matters. I don't know entirely what to do with that, but that, like, that, because that's the idea, right? What you're describing, Brian, like, that's what we want. We want to put Brian on a pedestal. One, because he deserves it. He's a beautiful bald man. It's great. But two, because, okay, so if he's the expert, if he's the trusted one, why? Why do you want to buy something that Brian talks about?
Because he has more experience when it comes to audio, and like, I trust his. He's very logical, analytical.
So
also,
if we could
I buy one of everything, and I try it out. I don't really, but it feels like it.
That's so valuable in the kids love toy unboxing videos, right? You know that Ryan's World channel?
Yeah.
That is,
yeah.
I find the existence of that channel noxious for, like, child endangerment reasons, but, like, that family makes millions and millions of dollars on YouTube by opening toys and letting Ryan play with them for 5 minutes. Can Brian be Ryan with microphones if he's already buying them?
I don't know.
But these are things, I guess, that's when I'm talking about, like, I would try to figure out someone, what is it that you uniquely bring to the table? Does that already exist? Because there's something valuable if it doesn't exist, right? Then you get to be new. You get to be the first. But also, okay, why is it working for these people? So in my head, I'm relating this to a toy channel and Marquez Brownlee doing tech reviews, which is mainly cell phones, right? Because his viewers are in high school and they are obsessed with their cell phone. Their cell phone is a status symbol. So when they can rattle off stats about a Samsung phone that they're never going to own, because by the time they have enough money to buy it, it's a dinosaur. That's why people are watching it. So that's one way of monetizing on YouTube. That's how those guys, Ryan and Marquez, they just do it with volume, right? They're just making money from YouTube's ad revenue because they get so many viewers. The idea for Brian would be to figure out, so if they're adults, they have disposable income. We know that. they have disposable income and a passion for this, but not necessarily the time or the excess income to try everything. So let's build Brian up into that expert that they can go to who's going to give them a reliable review on that. I just personally don't know if there'd be diminishing returns on, like, how often does someone buy a mic? How often do they need to know that? I don't know.
Yeah, well, and honestly, I'm less interested in that. I'm more thinking about, like, we're here to serve our community, not selling something is great, but we're here for Patrick and for Alejandro to help them as they're trying to build their businesses. We're not experts. We've just done some of this stuff. We've made a lot of the mistakes. So, but I think we probably need to go ahead and transition because we do have to get to our AI question of the day because that's the most fun part of the show. Jennifer, do you have a question for us today?
I do, but I feel like I'm cheating because you're the one who found it. But I'll go ahead and ask it. This is our sponsored by AI. We asked ChatGPT
if you want to
for a
sponsor
random
this spot,
question.
we'll take your money.
We asked ChatGPT for a random question, and Brian didn't like what it first generated, so he asked it again and again and again and again until he got a good one, which is, if you could have any animal as a tame miniature pet, which animal would you choose and why?
I already know my answer. I don't know. I don't need a miniature version, but a tame one, and that'd be a red panda.
Oh,
I
nice.
actually have like a little kind of
Yeah.
Lego version of red panda. I want to get a red panda tattoo. They're so cute and they're so funny. If you haven't seen a red panda, just get on TikTok or Instagram Reels and just watch videos of them, because they're in the family of raccoons, so they're very similar to a raccoon.
But they
when
move
they're
like
scared,
giant pandas.
yeah,
Just in a
and when they're
small
scared
way.
and try to be intimidating, they're a foot tall, but they get up real big and they put their arms up and they try to be so scary, and it's the cutest thing.
They are. Well, mine's
That's my
giant
answer.
panda because that's my favorite animal. So
They are dopey.
I think
They're so
I have
cute.
to choose
Yeah.
the liger.
Like a
Napoleon
lion
Dynamite.
tiger.
Yeah,
That's
because
my
I've got
favorite animal.
nunchuck skills and I've got bow staff skills. I just need a liger, and I would be the coolest guy in the Happy Hands Club.
It's perfect. I just got to go with a capybara. They're adorable.
Oh,
They're
nice.
giant. They're giant mouse things. The world's largest rodent. I could make them the size of a normal rodent. That sounds appealing. You can rub their giant, oversized noses.
They're pretty cute.
I mean, to be honest, I might want a tame, full-size capybara. That might be where I'm leaning. But
Patrick says, "What are the name of the sea dogs?
I have no
Like
idea.
a seal
Not a walrus.
or a sea lion.
I don't know, but there's a brewing company. I don't think that's what he's going for.
don't
I know
Power.
there's manatees. They're called sea cows.
Alejandro
I'm
agrees with
googling,
the
and all I'm finding
capybara.
is a.
Alejandro says something about Kung Fu Panda, so I think he's probably talking about you, Daniel.
Oh,
Or both.
well, now I got to look up Shifu.
Shifu, the
We're starting to
little
turn
guy.
into one of those shows where
yeah.
people Google stuff while they're on the air, aren't we?
Oh, sea lion
The
is
sea
what
lion.
Patrick says.
There we go.
It's a miniature size. You wouldn't have to have a big tank, but you'd have to have bigger than a fish tank, probably.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, thank you all for joining us today, live in the chat, live on Facebook, YouTube, and also on the replay and on the audio version. I'm Jennifer Longworth. You can find me at bourbonbarrelpodcasting.com, and the letter B, the beautiful bald man today is.
Yeah, you can find me at Top Tier Audio. I am Brian Ensminger, and I am bald, and it's not my favorite part, but it's kind of obvious. So there you go. Next up is Daniel.
I'm Daniel Abendroth. You can find me at rothmedia.audio.
And Rick, our special guest today.
I'm Rick Sellnow, the inferior bald man, and I'm just appreciative for being asked to join. Hope some of this was helpful, and just as a parting word, because Brian's stuck with me there, just wanting to help the audience, which is true. I would say do as little work as possible. Set up your cell phone. Don't invest in new stuff. Just at the very least, use these video platforms, especially the short form ones, to drive people to what you're already doing. If that's the easiest way to do it, just dip your toe in and see if there are results for you.
All right. Well, thank you
Awesome.
all, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Hit the button.